Close your eyes for just a moment. I
Yes.
mean, picture this. You are not in a cockpit. You're sitting in seat 27F, window seat, cruising at 38,000 feet right over the Baltic Sea.
Mm-hmm.
The cabin is dimmed to that sort of bruised purple color, the exact color of a half-slept red-eye flight. A baby stirs maybe 3 rows back, makes a soft mewling sound, and then just settles back down.
Yeah, everyone's trying to sleep.
Right. The guy sitting next to you has taken his shoes off, so there's that faint, slightly sour smell of feet mixing with duty-free cologne. A flight attendant walks past with a tray of half-empty plastic cups. The ice is still clinking around.
It's a very specific, mundane reality.
Exactly. And outside, the air temperature is like minus 53 degrees Celsius. The sky is this deep, star-pricked indigo. You look out the window and see the navigation light on the wingtip blinking with this tired metronomic rhythm. Just red pause. It feels safe. It feels inevitable, really, in the way that modern air travel has trained us all to feel. The coffee is bad, but it's warm. You're probably just sitting there thinking about your meeting tomorrow or the person you're flying to see or even just wondering if you locked the front door.
But the reality is, just 10 meters forward of where you were sitting, something is beginning to stir in the cockpit that really should not exist.
Yeah.
The first officer glances down at the primary flight display. The moving map, which literally a second ago showed the aircraft neatly bisecting the Gulf of Finland, now shows a ghost position.
A ghost position.
Right. The little white airplane icon just jumps 60 nautical miles to the south, then back, then south again. And it happens completely silently.
No alarms or anything.
No plunk, no shudder, absolutely zero physical sensation. The aircraft's inertial navigation system, which is this ring of laser gyroscopes spinning in a sealed box under the floor, that system still knows exactly where it is. But the GPS receiver, which is listening faithfully to the sky, has basically just swallowed a massive lie.
So the captain leans forward, the glow of the instrument panel lighting up her face. She doesn't say anything for a moment. She just reaches up, adjusts the overhead map display, and then quietly, almost to herself, she just says, "That's not right."
Yeah, because what she's experiencing isn't a malfunction. It's a ghost in the machine. It's a signal generated by, I don't know, maybe a nondescript van parked on a peninsula hundreds of miles away, or a military truck hidden in a tree line. And it's occupying the exact same frequency as the real navigation satellites.
Just whispering right into the aircraft's receiver.
Exactly. Telling it, you are somewhere else. You are lower than you think. Trust me. And the aircraft's computers are entirely trained to trust. So they begin to agree.
I mean, the crew doesn't panic. They train for this kind of thing. But training and reality are separated by a pretty thin, sweat-slick membrane. For a fleeting second, before those checklists actually kick in, there's this private, almost philosophical horror. What if everything we rely on to know where we are in the universe can just be rewritten by a total stranger we're never going to see?
Which is really the core of what we are looking at today.
Yeah, so our mission for today's deep dive into these reports is exploring exactly that. It's a story about faith. Faith in the invisible lattice of satellites holding the modern world together, and what happens when that faith is quietly and repeatedly betrayed on a massive scale.
And to really understand how this deception works mechanically, we have to distinguish between the two different phenomena that pilots are actually facing out there right now. Because one is merely annoying, but the other is actively deceitful.
Right, the whole jamming versus spoofing debate.
Exactly. That distinction is the absolute core of this entire crisis. So jamming is basically a denial of service. It relies on brute force radio noise.
Just drowning things out.
Right. A transmitter on the ground blasts out random static on the GPS frequencies. The aircraft's receiver gets overwhelmed. It realizes the signal is garbage, and it throws a warning flag on the pilot's screen. It says, hey, the signal is lost.
So it's disruptive, and it forces them to use backups, but it's honest.
Yes, the system knows it is blind. It tells you it's blind.
The analogy I always use for jamming is like, imagine you're in a horribly crowded, really noisy room. A friend across the room is trying to shout driving directions to you, but someone is standing right next to you screaming at the top of their lungs.
Right, you can't hear a thing.
You completely lose your friend's voice, which is frustrating, obviously, but you are fully aware that you can't hear them. You know you need to pull out a paper map. Spoofing, though, is entirely different.
Very different.
Spoofing is when someone stands behind you, perfectly mimics your friend's voice, and confidently gives you the exact wrong directions.
That imitation is exactly what makes it so dangerous. Spoofing is the injection of a structured, counterfeit signal that perfectly replicates the format of a genuine satellite transmission.
It looks real to the computer.
Completely real. The aircraft's receiver accepts it as valid data. So suddenly, the flight management system is being fed false coordinates, false speeds, or false altitudes. And there are zero warning flags because, as far as the computer is concerned, everything is functioning perfectly.
Which naturally raises the question, how on earth can a laptop on the ground trick a multi-million-dollar aircraft into completely ignoring a billion-dollar satellite network?
It really just comes down to basic physics and signal strength. You have to remember, those legitimate navigation satellites are orbiting roughly 12,000 miles above the Earth.
Right.
By the time their transmission actually reaches the antenna on top of an airliner, the signal is incredibly faint. We're talking about less power than a single Christmas tree light bulb viewed from 1,000 miles away.
That is wild. Just a whisper of a signal.
Barely a whisper. And because that legitimate signal is so faint, a terrestrial spoofer on the ground only needs to broadcast at a few watts of power to completely drown it out. The aircraft's receiver is inherently designed to lock onto the strongest, clearest signal it can find.
So the fake signal just bullies the real one out of the way.
Exactly. It overpowers it. The instruments look completely valid, which allows these navigational errors to just accumulate silently over time.
Yeah.
There was actually a quote in one of the reports that framed this perfectly. It said, "The aircraft is not lost. It is confidently wrong."
Confidently wrong. That is a terrifying state for an automated system to be in, especially considering this isn't just some theoretical vulnerability anymore. The scale of this interference is just exploding right now.
It's massive.
Looking at the source data from the International Air Transport Association, they tracked a 220% increase in signal loss events just between 2021 and 2024.
Yeah.
And then OPSG, or UP, this Independent Flight Operations Advisory Group, they monitored a 500% spike in spoofing incidents in 2024 alone. We are talking about roughly 1,500 commercial flights a day being affected by this.
1,500 flights every single day. And when you look at the mapping of these incidents, the data clusters around very specific geographical hotspots.
Let's talk about those hotspots.
Well, the Eastern Mediterranean has become a major epicenter. The reports show that in one 2-month period, the airspace around Cyprus logged more than 5,600 distinct spoofing incidents.
Wow.
Which is the highest concentration of any monitored airspace globally.
And the Black Sea is seeing it heavily, too. I loved this one detail in the research regarding a Romanian weather balloon.
Oh, right, the balloon incident.
Yeah, this balloon was floating at 11 kilometers up, which is around 36,000 feet, so standard cruising altitude for passenger jets. And it recorded a definitive spoofing event where its reported GPS position just abruptly jumped entirely away from its physical location.
It shifted straight towards Simferopol in occupied Crimea.
Exactly, just instantly teleported on the map. And then the Baltics are the third major hotspot. Between January and April of 2025, over 122,000 flights traversing Swedish, Finnish, Polish, and Baltic airspace experienced these navigational signal disturbances.
The sheer volume really forces us to look at the mechanisms driving this massive surge. And the primary driver documented in all these reports is the spillover from military electronic warfare.
See, this is where the situation feels incredibly disjointed to me. We are talking about military electronic warfare, but the aircraft being blinded are like A320s carrying vacationers to Cyprus or cargo planes hauling microchips over Poland. It's hard to wrap your head around why civilian aviation is taking the brunt of this when they clearly aren't the intended targets of these military operations.
Well, it's because radio waves do not recognize borders on an airspace chart. Military units use spoofing to protect high-value assets from drone attacks or to confuse incoming guided munitions. They're basically casting this massive electronic umbrella over a whole region.
Right.
The problem is that this umbrella extends vertically and horizontally for hundreds of miles, spilling directly into civilian flight corridors. It functions almost like a cold draft blowing into a house.
The people sitting in the living room have nothing to do with the storm outside.
Exactly, but they freeze all the same.
And just to remain impartial on the geopolitical side of this, it's worth noting the reports mention that the UN's aviation agency, the ICAO, actually issued formal condemnations regarding radio frequency interference originating from the Russian Federation and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Right, they cited it as an infraction of international civil aviation conventions.
Correct. But state-level actors are really only one part of the equation here.
Yeah, the second driver the reports highlight involves organized illicit exploitation. So you've got smugglers and traffickers actively manipulating these signals to hide the movements of their ships at sea or to obscure illicit drones from regional surveillance networks.
And then the third driver is perhaps the most concerning one for the long term. It's the complete collapse of the technical barrier to entry. We're seeing a massive proliferation of cheap commercial technology known as software-defined radios, or SDRs. Just to put SDRs in perspective for you listening at home historically, if you wanted to transmit a specific radio frequency, you needed a machine with physical, hardwired circuits built exclusively for that one frequency. It was expensive and really complex.
Right.
But an SDR is essentially a universal translator. It's a piece of hardware you just plug into a laptop, and software dictates the radio waves it produces. It turns coding into physical radio frequencies. So someone with a few $100s and some open source code downloaded from the internet can theoretically bend the reality of an airliner flying miles above their head.
That accessibility completely transforms what used to be a military-grade capability into a ubiquitous nuisance. And while the data and the hardware explain the mechanics, I don't think they really capture the human element of what's happening.
No, not at all.
The reports detail some severe psychological impacts on the crews operating these aircraft. When the screens begin to lie, the cockpit becomes a very hostile environment.
The November 2025 incidents near Delhi illustrate this perfectly. Aircraft were on approach to the airport when their terrain avoidance systems, the EGPWS, suddenly started screaming false warnings.
Yeah, the EGPWS works by comparing the plane's GPS position and altitude against a digital map of the Earth's terrain.
Right, so if a spoofer feeds the plane a fake altitude, telling the computer it's plunging toward the ground, the system reacts exactly as it's programmed to. It just yells at the pilots, "Terrain, terrain, pull-up-y!"
And the physiological reaction to that auditory warning is immediate. The adrenaline and cortisol spike instantly. A pilot is trained to trust that warning with their life, to immediately haul back on the controls.
But they're looking out the window at a completely safe cruising altitude, miles above any mountains, and they have to realize the machine is literally hallucinating.
That dissonance is exhausting. The airspace near Delhi actually became so chaotic that India's civil aviation regulator mandated that pilots report any anomalies within 10 minutes, simply to try and map the real-time movement of these invisible dead zones.
And the hallucinations get incredibly strange, too. I mean, there was a flight over the Mediterranean where the spoofing didn't just target the location coordinates, it targeted the satellite timing data.
The clock incident, yes.
The digital clock on the center pedestal of the cockpit, which read 3:47 a.m., suddenly started running backward in these massive leaps. It jumped to 22.10, then 18.02, and the first officer, who is sitting in a multi-million-dollar state-of-the-art flight deck dealing with a highly sophisticated digital deception, he responds by taking a mundane sticky note and placing it directly over the digital display.
I think that sticky note is a really powerful symbol. It represents this physical barrier against digital madness. What these crews are fighting is the slow erosion of trust in their primary instruments. The psychological burden of constantly verifying what should be automatic takes a really heavy toll.
Absolutely.
Interestingly, the research notes a real divide in how different generations of pilots handle this. There is what they call a pre-digital memory among the older elders of the aviation community. One source highlighted a 1993 East German engineer who vividly remembers navigating by stopwatches and basic math.
Dead reckoning.
Yeah.
It's the most foundational form of navigation there is. You basically draw a line on a map from your last known position. If you know you're flying 500 miles an hour due east and exactly 1 hour has passed, you draw a dot 500 miles east of where you started.
Right, you don't need a satellite for that.
You just need speed, time, and a compass. The older generation remembers when keeping a plane inside a tight digital corridor required constant mental calculation, not just a reliance on a glowing magenta line on a screen.
They remember the inherent fragility of flight. And the sources also point to the lingering psychic weight of past tragedies, like Garuda Flight 200 back in 2007, where erroneous data and a loss of situational awareness contributed to a fatal crash. That history lives in the minds of veteran captains. You see it in the way they might hesitate just a fraction of a second before fully trusting the autopilot during a spoofing event. They know the rules of reality are being bent without a visible perpetrator.
So the crews are constantly pushing back against this invisible pressure through these very quiet, grounded acts of routine. The reports describe a dispatcher on the ground who receives a flurry of spoofing alerts, calmly updates the flight routing contingencies, and then just deliberately walks over to make a fresh pot of coffee.
Or the flight attendant who experiences an unannounced go-around because the pilots lost the approach signal.
Right, and she just meticulously rearranges the juice cans in her galley cart so all the labels face forward. Mechanics are sweeping the hangar floors. They are wrestling the sky back from digital chaos by insisting on the persistence of the ordinary.
Reclaiming physical reality when the digital reality is compromised. It is a necessary psychological defense.
Mm.
But, human resilience alone doesn't keep a 300-ton aircraft in the sky when its primary navigation is lying to it.
No, it definitely doesn't.
The architecture of the aircraft itself has to be resilient.
Which brings us to the most pressing question for anyone listening to this. If the primary signals are compromised and the pilots are constantly second-guessing their screens, how are you still crossing oceans safely? Why aren't we seeing planes completely lost?
Well, the answer lies in the layers of redundancy that sit beneath the floorboards, completely isolated from the invisible war outside. The foundational backup is the Inertial Navigation System, or INS.
Yeah, the INS.
This is an incredible piece of engineering. The INS does not look at the sky, does not receive radio signals. It relies entirely on a self-contained unit utilizing ring laser gyroscopes and accelerometers.
The physics of the laser gyroscope are just fascinating to visualize. Inside a sealed box, two beams of laser light are fired in opposite directions around a closed loop, usually in a triangle. And as long as the plane is flying perfectly straight, the two beams travel the exact same distance. But the moment the aircraft turns, pitches, or rolls, the physical path for one beam becomes slightly longer than the other. The lasers interact, creating an interference pattern, a phase shift. The computer measures that microscopic shift in the light and calculates the exact rotation and movement of the aircraft.
And because it operates purely on internal physics, the Sagnac effect, it's completely immune to external radio interference. The INS knows exactly where it started at the gate, it feels every single acceleration and turn, and it continuously calculates its current position based solely on that physical movement.
It's the ultimate blind explorer, trusting only its internal senses.
Exactly. But even the INS drifts slightly over time without external updates. So when the digital signals are totally compromised, aviation actually falls back on technology developed in the 1930s.
Oh, I loved this part of the report.
Yeah, in March 2025, a Ryanair flight descending into Gdańsk, Poland, encountered unreliable satellite signals. The crew aborted the digital approach and landed safely using a non-directional beacon, or NDB.
Which is literally just a ground station blasting out an analog radio wave that a needle in the cockpit points toward.
Going retro to stay alive. Aviation authorities actually maintain what's called a minimum operating network. It's a skeleton grid of these conventional ground-based navigation beacons. They're expensive to maintain, and obviously less precise than satellites, but they serve as an unhackable safety net when the digital systems fail.
However, the industry is not just retreating to analog tech, right? They are actively building a digital immune system to fight the spoofing directly.
Right. The military has been dealing with this for years, and they are finally sharing their hardware with civil aviation. The U.S. State Department recently declassified CRPA technology.
Controlled reception pattern antennas.
Yes. Instead of one single antenna passively listening to the sky, a CRPA uses multiple antenna elements.
Wait, so how does having multiple antennas help if the signal is still fake?
Well, the mechanics are brilliant. When a jamming or spoofing signal hits the aircraft, the multiple elements of the CRPA receive that signal at slightly different times, like fractions of a nanosecond apart.
Oh, I see.
The internal processor calculates exactly what direction the hostile signal is coming from based on that delay. It then manipulates the phase of the incoming waves to create destructive interference. It electronically steers a null, or a blind spot, directly at the spoofer.
That's amazing.
It effectively punches a hole in the interference, silencing the attacker while continuing to listen to the clean satellite signals coming from other directions.
It just perfectly cancels out the noise. And alongside that hardware, there are massive strides in software sensor fusion, too. Like Honeywell launching HANA, the alternative navigation architecture. It takes that sealed box of laser gyroscopes we talked about, the INS, and cross-references it with cameras actively scanning the terrain below, sensors reading the Earth's magnetic anomalies, and even celestial trackers.
And we also have to look at the Iridium PNT chip. This is a huge leap forward. It utilizes the Iridium satellite constellation, which operates in low Earth orbit, so it's much closer than traditional GPS satellites.
In closer means a stronger signal.
Right. Because they are closer, their signal is roughly 1,000 times more powerful, making it incredibly difficult to overpower with a terrestrial jammer.
But more importantly, the Iridium signal is cryptographically secure. It isn't just an open broadcast that anyone can mimic.
Exactly. The signal carries a digital signature that shifts constantly based on complex cryptographic keys. A spoofer might record the signal and try to broadcast it back, but the aircraft's computer knows that specific mathematical key has already expired.
So unless the spoofer somehow possesses the highly classified algorithm to generate the next correct key.
The counterfeit signal is immediately recognized as a fraud and discarded. Through CRPAs, sensor fusion, and secure low Earth orbit networks, aviation is constructing a multi-layered defense to survive this environment.
Which brings us right back to you. Sitting in seat 27F over the Baltic Sea. The air smells the same. The ice in your cup still clinks. The baby is still sleeping. Outside, this invisible war of signals is raging. That cold draft is blowing against the digital windows of the cockpit. But the crew is running their checklists. The laser gyroscopes are quietly measuring the physics of the turn. The mundane human act of flying is wrestling reality back from the edge every single day.
It really is a profound testament to engineering resilience. But, the vulnerability we have unpacked today does not stop at the airport perimeter.
No, it doesn't.
The aviation sector is merely the most visible front line. GNSS provides the invisible scaffolding for our entire civilization. Positioning, navigation, and timing PNT. That timing element dictates the rhythm of the modern world.
It really does. Those precise satellite timestamps synchronize the alternating current of global power grids. They validate the exact millisecond of billions of financial transactions, ensuring high-frequency trading doesn't just collapse into chaos. They enable cellular networks to hand off your phone call from one tower to the next without dropping.
When a spoofing event hits an airliner at 38,000 feet, that aircraft is essentially acting as a canary in the coal mine.
Yeah.
It is absolute proof that the invisible signals we implicitly trust can be manipulated remotely, without warning, and without a physical attack. The ghosts are already in the machine.
So, we leave you with this final thought to mull over long after you take your headphones off. If our entire modern terrestrial infrastructure, from the flow of electricity illuminating your house, to the global banking system securing your money, to the cellular networks keeping you connected, relies on the exact same fragile, invisible signals currently being spoofed in the sky, what happens when this invisible warfare permanently descends from 38,000 feet and begins targeting the systems that dictate the reality of our daily lives on the ground?